Welcome to our podcast, Keep Walking With Me. Today, we have a very special guest from the other side of the pond, more precisely from California. We're going to talk with Alex Soojung-Kim Pang. And the best way to start is to ask, in a nutshell, who is Alex?
So thanks for having me on. I am a technology forecaster and futurist. I live in Silicon Valley, and I'm also the author of, most recently, a book about the 4-day work week and how it can change the world. And it's a sort of sequel to my previous book about the hidden role of rest in the lives of super creative and prolific people. So that's who I am.
Thank you, Alex.
That's great. Well, so I realize you work a lot around productivity, so working less hours but being more productive. Considering that, are there any tricks or routines or ideas that you want to share with us on that?
Well, I think that the first thing that I would sort of recommend is that, that's my dog in the background. But that we often underestimate the importance of focused work in sort of helping us do really good work in a very satisfying and satisfactory way. I think we tend to think of sort of productivity as something that comes from spending many, many hours at work. And there's a lot of great research that indicates that really we should prioritize sort of smaller periods of more intense work. The other reason that that's important is that it clears more space in our day. It kind of gives permission for rest, which is also, and that in turn helps us both recover the time and energy that we spend sort of working intensively, but it also creates another opportunity for us. We are fine, dog. It creates another opportunity for us to sort of exercise creative muscles, because when we rest, we actually, our creative subconscious is actually doing an awful lot of work on our behalf. And so I think that recognizing that and learning how to build that into our daily routines is a really important thing.
Alex, in your book, Rest, you dedicated a chapter to walking. Mm-hmm. What do you think is the relationship between two activities that actually for some people, they might look like opposite actions? So resting and walking.
Mm-hmm. So I think that first of all, that actually, rest is less passive good rest is less passive a thing than we normally think. When I started working on the book, my vision of sort of rest was very much like those of, I think, most of us. Sitting on the couch with a TV remote in one hand and a bag of snacks in the other. But one of the things that I discovered was that the most restorative kinds of rest, the ones that give us both the greatest kind of recharge of our mental and emotional or batteries, but also the ones that do us the most good, help us be more sort of creative, help us be better people, actually are very active. And so so I think that sort of first of all, the relationship is closer because we don't really because the best forms of rest actually are more like things like walking and exercise. And then more specifically, I think that walking in the context of my book is important because it turns out to be sort of both a significant form of kind of creative stimulus. There's some really fascinating work that shows that we actually that walking stimulates the imagination. It helps us solve problems. And that helps explain why lots of amazingly productive and important figures in science and sort of science and literature and the arts made walking part of their everyday lives.
So do you think we can say, you should have a rest, go for a walk?
Yes, no, absolutely. I mean, I think that certainly as a break from work, having, I think sort of walks are almost without peer. And I think that, as a great everyday example of the kinds of rest that we should build more time in our days and our lives for, I think walking also is a great example.
Thank you.
Thank you. That is, well, we certainly can testify that walking can be very relaxing and actually restorative and helps us do great work. So we're totally on the same page there. I would like to, put in a provocation because during the confinement, we mentor many leaders, and one of the most frequent complaints was they could not control their people. They could not see that their people were doing, their teams were doing their work. So this sense of trading time for money is still so much present in our society. It was, and we're not talking about labor work. We're talking about actually attorneys, high-level executives, so people that you should rely on and actually be relaxed that as long as the output is there, the quality is there, you shouldn't worry. So how can we do this swap from trading time for money to something else?
Mm-hmm. I think first of all that it's useful to to think a little bit more about when you're in the office, what you actually see people doing. And I think that's particularly in in offices, in professional contexts, with services, you can see that people are, sitting here, they're looking at screens. There are some indicators that there is some kind of busyness going on, but those are very, very rough, rough approximators or proxies for the for what you really want out of people, which is, good thinking, very often detailed or creative thinking, expressed by, particular products or advice to clients or, et cetera. And so I think that, first of all, once you realize that, you are in the office witnessing or observing people's work through a kind of, couple layers of indirect indicators I think that's a useful first thing. The second is to recognize that time does not translate into productivity as clearly as we have been led to believe. That we are people. I think we've all had the experience of in our own lives of having those couple undistracted hours where we're able to get really enormous, satisfying amounts of work done, versus long days that are kind of broken up by meetings and distractions where 6 o'clock rolls around and you wonder where the day went. And so I think that for leaders, it is much more effective to think in terms of projects, in terms of deliverables, as opposed to simply in terms of time. And that in order to foster good work from people, your challenge as a leader is not to maximize the amount of time people are spending at work, but rather to maximize maximize their opportunities for doing deep focused work. So so that's what I would advise leaders who are caught up in this in this sensibility to do.
Well, that's a great opportunity, actually, Alex, to ask you, based on this trade, between output and quality, if you can suggest us your first music and maybe explain us why you picked that one.
Okay, so the first song that I chose was the aria from Bach's Goldberg Variations. So it's sort of the first piece in the Variations. And I chose that because I am someone who listens to music a lot when I work. And the music that I listen to changes quite a bit during the day. Bach and sort of a few other classical composers are what I listen to in the very early morning when I get up to write. And when I'm working on a book or some other project, I'll get up, at like 5 or 5:30 and spend a couple hours before everybody else is awake, often doing the best work that I will do that day. And what I find is that the right kind of music really helps me concentrate, really helps me focus in those periods. And that in those super early hours, classical music, non-vocal with extremely simple arrangements, so not orchestral music, for example, is what serves me best. And the Goldberg Variations are one of the pieces that I reach for most consistently when I'm working in the morning.
Well, let's listen to the Goldberg Variations. And obviously, whoever is listening, probably tomorrow at 5:30 in the morning, they should do the same. Thank you for this first song, Alex. Let me ask you, do you think we have a problem of attention in our world? And if you think so, why do we have a problem of attention? And do you think it's possible to solve it somehow?
The answer is yes, we do, and yes, we can. So yes, we do, because I think we live in a world that has more or less been designed to maximize distractions and a kind of refactoring of our attention away from things that we want to do to things that, for example, social media companies want us to engage with. I think that the fact that we live in a world in which we carry our offices around in our pockets, and that we interact with one another through sometimes technologies or media that are designed to gather up time from enormous numbers of people that they can then resell to advertisers, creates both a tremendous incentive to come up with ever more sophisticated ways of capturing and commodifying our attention, and great financial incentives to do so. If Facebook has, let's say, 1 billion users, and they can figure out how to get each user to spend 1 more minute per day on their platform, that's another 1,900 years of advertising time that they can set, that they can make money off of. And I think that more broadly, that designers have gotten really, really good at finding ways of capturing our attention. Much better than they have at figuring out ways of designing technologies that help us focus and be more mindful. Now, fortunately, though, we have a very long history of techniques for allowing us to kind of recapture control of our attention and more generally of our minds, that goes back a couple thousand years. Right. The problem of distraction is actually not a new one. It's one that the ancient Greeks grappled with, that the Buddhists were talking about more than 2 millennia ago. And so these are, I think that between making use of those kinds of techniques, whether they be mindfulness, meditation, what have you, recognizing the ways in which our technologies try to bend our attention to their own ends, the ways in which they do so continuously, puts us on a path of being able to recognize when that's going on, and finding way and developing strategies for countering that and for sort of recapturing control over our minds. So I think that the attention problem is a very real one, but it's also one that we are often better equipped to solve than the world would have us believe.
Absolutely.
Well, sure. That's of course the old approaches are proven and for sure they work.
Yes.
But one question I would place to you, and I think we already have some examples of this, is can the technology be repurposed to produce more attention? Can we actually expect this? And I mean, you are in the middle of the whole thing. Can this industry repurpose itself? Can this industry actually see the need for a more ethical and more humane, I would say, behavior, and actually adapt to that? And in what way?
I think that there are enormous financial and structural incentives not to do those things, right? I think that when you are, Silicon Valley and the tech industry generally is one in which hyper fast growth has for years been considered far more important than revenues or profitability, right? And in that kind of environment where you are constantly trying to get more users, you're trying to increase your growth and engagement metrics, there is very little disincentive for designing technologies that help people focus on what they want to focus on rather than what platforms want to focus on. Now, I think also that that to get a little bit more technical, we really are better at figuring out ways to distract people, designing technologies for that purpose than figuring out how to design platforms that sort of encourage concentration. But I think it's also the case that we do know, after a decade's worth of grand experiments on technology and attention, sort of how better we as individuals can approach these problems, but also how much these problems are not just kind of baked into the systems, but really are also a function of company culture and workplace norms, and how one of the most effective ways that we can deal with these problems is to recognize the degree to which they are driven by sort of collective habit, and that and to see that there are strategies that we can develop sort of within organizations that help us carve out more free time for ourselves and recapture our attention.
That's really interesting because walking is probably one of the most, if not the most inefficient way to get from point A to point B. I heard that at least once in one of our programs. A participant brought my attention to that point. Nevertheless, we also understand that by walking, you can have a level of engagement related with your life, your thoughts, that probably you can hardly reach the same level in other activities. Do you see any kind of parallelism between, this conflict between efficiency and engagement in the workplace? Because it seems that some organizations, they see it on part of the same equation, but how this is happening, how can you be efficient, but at the same time be engaged at doing something, or it's either or? How do you see it?
Well, I think that that much of the problem comes from defining efficiency along sort of using the wrong axes or sort of wrong metrics. So when we think of sort of efficient use of people's time as sort of maximizing the number of hours that they're working for us, for example, I think that's that turns out to be a kind of category error that not only fails to recognize that sort of hours spent at a task do not translate into sort of higher productivity. And indeed, after a certain period, productivity drops after long periods of overwork. But it also incentivizes at the managerial and organizational level all kinds of bad behavior, right? I think that the companies and managers have the freedom not to make hard choices about priorities. If, for example, if you can just assume that everyone will stay late and just do everything. And so that's an example of a kind of organizational inefficiency, a kind of inefficiency in the attention of a firm that is enabled by by a vision of how organizations can use people's time most efficiently, quote unquote. And so I do think that it is necessary to sort of rethink what efficiency and effectiveness and productivity really mean, and how we measure, and sort of what indicators we use to measure and to understand them. But once we do, we can construct workplaces and routines and lives that are sort of both more productive and sort of more pleasurable, and also leave in a lot more time for apparently inefficient but secretly sort of very productive things like walking.
That's a great answer. Well, let me follow on that. And if you look 10 years into the future, if you look into 2030, how do you see the world?
So, I think that we are in the middle of a period right now where it feels like years worth of organizational change, is now happening in months, right? I think that the pandemic and lockdowns have both shown companies that it's possible to change a lot faster than they ever thought possible, and also I think pushed the adoption of things like sort of remote work and use of video conferencing, cloud-based services, etc., much faster than they would have otherwise. Having sort of with the caveat that it is that the rapidity of this change makes it difficult to make to make reliable forecasts a decade out. I do think that we are going to be in a place where far more of us are going to be engaged in work in sort of hybrid spaces, or are divided across, sometime in offices, sometimes remotely, sometimes at home. And I hope that companies have a better understanding of when each of those is really sort of most suitable for particular kinds of work. As great as it is to not have to put on pants to go to work, plenty of us, I think, kind of miss the office and miss being around other people. Yeah. I think another significant thing is that remote work and work from home is not going to go away once we go back to something like a new normal. That cat is out of the bag. I think also that the two other things that I am seeing are first of all, a rethinking of working hours themselves. I've been struck by the number of companies that have implemented 4-day weeks in response, during the pandemic, or that have moved to 4-day weeks in order to reward people for their efforts during these difficult times. The NBA, the Professional Basketball Association here in the United States, just announced that that its staff would be moving to 4-day weeks for all of October, because they had done such great work holding everything together during one of the craziest seasons of all time. So I think we're going to see more experiments of that sort, and I think finally that we're also going to see more attention given to sort of how we can design schedules, design workplaces that account for things like circadian rhythms, right? The daily rise and fall in attention, in energy level, and that recognize that actually our capacity to do things like deep work versus shallow work change a lot during the course of the day, and that both individuals and organizations could realize substantial gains in productivity and become happier workplaces by paying attention to that and sort of designing days accordingly. This is something that I see very creative people who have a lot of control over their time sort of doing for themselves. And I think that and with great result. And it is one of the great frontiers, I think, for organizational design and job crafting in the future. And so I think we're going to recognize its importance and have the tools necessary to make it to put it into practice in the workplace in 2030.
All right. Alex, maybe it's a good time to ask you for a second music.
Sure. So I think along the lines of thinking about sort of pushing toward the future, I would not. There's Hans Zimmer, the great modern composer, wrote the soundtrack for Call of Duty: Modern Warfare 2, and there's the piece I nominated was Onwards. And during the not in the morning but later on in the day, I'll often listen to movie and video game soundtracks because again they're generally instrumental. They are designed to kind of operate, to be listened to without a lot of conscious attention, but they're designed to kind of energize a scene. And so as a kind of music that is supposed to kind of lift your mood without imposing itself on, and demanding too much of your attention, I think it's a great song.
Wow. Well, let's then listen to Call of Duty.
Onwards.
Onwards. Okay, so thank you. This was great. Now I understand when my youngest son actually is playing Call of Duty. I know what he's doing. He's educating himself.
There you go.
So thank you for this piece. Well, Shorter is your new book, and it advocates basically the idea of a 4-day work week. Nevertheless, and we talked about that, since the beginning of the COVID pandemic, many people are complaining that they're working, longer and longer than any time before. How do you think we can reverse this current situation?
Sure. Okay, so part of the reason that people are working longer hours during the pandemic is that we're having to juggle a whole bunch of things simultaneously that we generally haven't had to, right? I think anyone who's a parent who has had kids homeschooling at this time sort of knows that there is plenty of work that goes into creating the illusion of work-life balance and a kind of sort of effortless ability to prioritize work over family at the very best of times, and all of that has been blown up by the current situation. I think that we're running this kind of gigantic experiment in inventing new ways of working under sort of less than ideal circumstances. But I do think that it is really notable that there are companies that have gone remote, that have discovered that this has forced them to do things like make meetings a lot shorter or think a lot more about how they use technology wisely, that has allowed them to both be more productive and allow them to give back time to workers who are stressed by family commitments, health issues, etc. And so while plenty of us have found ourselves in positions where our bosses simply said, explicitly or implicitly, yes, this is completely new. There are all kinds of pressures here. We're just going to let you figure it out for yourself and expect the same kind of work as before. There are companies and leaders that have recognized the opportunity to genuinely do things differently. And I think that they are a model for all of us going forward.
Sure. Well, I do believe they need to pay attention to that and really look for the good examples, because it's definitely an issue and obviously an opportunity. For
yes,
sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, definitely. And we are. I think one of the things that is becoming very painfully clear is that if this were a movie, we would not be rolling the credits. Right. This is not the end. This is not the end of the movie. This is a TV show, and it's the end of the first season, and it's a cliffhanger. Right. In the United States, we're talking not about a second COVID wave, but a third one. And and we are at a point where I think companies should assume that we're not going to go to the way things were in January or February, but this ride is going to be lasting quite a while, and we're all going to have to figure out better ways of dealing with it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, as you know, we do mentoring in nature, while walking in nature. So actually we use the tool of walking in nature to develop creativity and focus and all that. Do you personally have an experience of walking that involves walking in nature that meaningfully marked your life or set some kind of significant moment for you?
I do this every day. As your listeners will know, I have a dog. I have actually two of them, though one of them is very quiet, and we go out walking every morning. I will, as I said, after writing for a couple hours, we will go out and walk for an hour or more or so. And when I'm doing that, I will carry along a little notebook and write down beforehand a couple of the things that I have been working on that I'm kind of stuck on. Whether this is how to express a particular idea, transitions between pieces of an argument, very technical writerly stuff. And when I'm out with the dogs, I will often have solutions to these problems pop into my head. And I write them down because otherwise I'll forget them. We keep walking, I might have another idea, and then when I come back, I'll work out those ideas for the rest of the morning. This is something that I do pretty much daily, and it is an essential part of how I write. And for me, I think that being able to get away from the desk, to be able to to get out, to walk around, to be in an environment where I'm not paying a lot of conscious attention to any particular thing, but one of the things when you're out walking in a park or someplace nice is that your attention isn't grabbed very hard by any particular thing, and so your mind is capable of wandering in a way that we know helps us be more creative and gives our creative subconscious an opportunity to work on problems that have recently occupied our conscious attention, but which we haven't been able to solve. And so, for me, that morning walk with the dogs is a daily reminder of the creative value of walks and of time away from your desk in natural surroundings, and a reminder of just how much a difference those can make in boosting your productivity and boost, and also your health and happiness.
That's so interesting, because you're mainly talking about Where do you collect the energy so you can, put it somewhere? So looking at the world today, in what are you planning to focus your energy in the near future?
The movement to shorten the work week is global and diverse, but it's only just now becoming aware of itself. And in my last book, Shorter, I talk about more than 100 companies that move to 4-day weeks or 6-hour days or some other combination of permanent reduction of working hours. Since that book has come out, I've spent time with probably another 50 or 60 companies, just in the last few months that have made this transition. And so for me, I think that continuing to follow this movement and working with companies that are interested in trialing their own 4-day weeks is the main thing that's going to occupy me for my foreseeable future.
All right.
That's great.
Sounds like a great adventure.
Yeah, it does. And that would be my follow-on question. If you could embark on an adventure today, right now, without any constraints, what would that be?
Well, for one thing, it would involve plenty of travel, because that's the one thing that's the thing that I miss most during the lockdown, is being able to go places. As lovely as California is, it's still it's still something that I really miss. I think that this will sound boring, but it's not meant to. But I would continue to do the work that I just described. I would just do more of it out on the field rather than rather than online. I think that there is the companies that I've been studying who have reduced their working hours, for me, are a really fascinating bunch. And I think there is an awful lot that you get being able to just kind of hang out in their offices, see how they work, see the little details of, of how they're using tools, how they're arranging their spaces, that you really can't see through a screen. And so I think that if time and money were no object and COVID didn't exist, I would be out with my camera and my backpack, spending time hanging out with those companies, and really getting a deeper understanding of how they work and how their lessons, how their experiences can be shared with others.
Well, that's really inspiring. Actually, I think it's the second participant we've had that answered almost the same thing, which is I would keep on doing what I'm doing, which is beautiful, because really it's that old saying that if you love what you do, then you'll never have to work another day in your life. So I guess you found a good job. Huh?
Well, it's a good job. I think it's still, it is still work. But however, it is work that that I find really engaging and compelling. So,
but hopefully sooner than later, Alex, you will be back on the road with your backpack, and
I hope so,
as well as we.
Yeah.
Well,
maybe it's a good time to ask you for your third song.
Okay, so the third song that I had nominated was Regiment by Brian Eno and David Byrne from My Life in the Bush of Ghosts. This is a collaboration from about 1980 or so, and I chose this actually for part of the same reason that I really like to travel. Which is that this is a song that has been kind of on my playlist since I was in college. It is one of the albums that I listened to a lot when I was in school studying, and so and even today, it has a place on one of my work playlists, And it's one of those songs that, as soon as it comes on, it triggers both a whole bunch of, emotional associations or memories, but also serves as a kind of signal that, that I really ought to be focused and I really ought to be working. So for me, that's Regiment.
Well, then let's listen to Regiment. All right, thank you for that third song, Regiment. Well, Alex, we are approaching the end of our talk, and there is a last challenge that we'd like to pose to you. Let's build a time capsule, and you can put whatever you want inside, message, things, and we're going to shoot it into the infinite and beyond, and hopefully 1 year, 100 years, 1,000 years from now, someone will open, and let's see what they will find inside this time capsule. This time is yours.
So you want you want things that kind of encapsulate this age or 2020. This is this is not something I've ever really thought about. But for, I think for, if I were to try to illustrate this year in a few objects, I think that, the first one would be a webcam, because it's one that, something that that an awful lot of us have become have had to acquire or become sort of more familiar with. I think it would also be, another thing would be a pair of pajamas, which lots of us have worked in and spent a lot more time in than maybe ever before. And a pair of noise-canceling headphones, which right now, thanks to the dog, I wish I had. And then, I almost want to say like an unused plane ticket, which is a little bit sad, but maybe the last, I think I will leave it at those three. So, webcam, noise canceling headphones, and pajamas.
Which is great.
So.
Well, Alex, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to have you here today with us, proving that technology can bridge such a long distance and time zones, but at the same time, keep us so close and so warm. Yeah. So
it's been a huge pleasure, really inspiring to talk to you. A lot of great insights that you brought to us and to our viewers, of course. And I sure look forward to keep walking with you and hopefully with many more people.
Thank you, Alex. Keep walking.
All right.
With you.
Thank you very much, guys. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.